What do you like? Tell me what you like.
There's value in that because it almost gives the brain like a vacation, right?
Holistic health is completely underappreciated, but so critical. Eating whole foods, and the key is just to find something that you really enjoy.
Welcome to the NAMP Nourishing You podcast. I'm Kristen Burkett.
And I'm Diana Wally. We're your hosts for NAMP's podcast dedicated to connecting holistic health enthusiasts with each other to share practical information from the holistic wellness space for enhanced vitality.
Diana and I are master nutrition therapists, board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices and an online joint venture that supports clients and practitioners as they strive to reach their full potential. We're honored to be hosting this podcast for NAMP and connecting our listeners with the latest in holistic wellness.
And if you enjoyed today's show, help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Nourishing You podcast. We're looking forward to our conversation with MaryAnn Marks today to shed some light on why our air quote, normal labs may not actually be as great as we're led to believe. MaryAnn is the creator, founder, and CEO of LabSmarts. She's also a holistic nutrition consultant, receiving her education from Bowman College, and a functional medicine practitioner, widely regarded by her peers as the go-to resource for blood chemistry analysis. LabSmarts was born out of MaryAnn's passion and knowledge for analyzing blood work and her excitement and experience in developing automation software. MaryAnn has combined the skills from her 20 years in the tech industry with the skills from her 8 years in holistic health to create a tool that helps practitioners be more effective and efficient at analyzing blood work to improve client outcomes. Welcome, MaryAnn. We can't wait to dive into this with you today.
Thank you both, Kristen and Diane. I really appreciate you having me here today. Thank you.
You know, it's so exciting, MaryAnn, when we can meet a fellow holistic nutrition practitioner who's innovating in our space so that we can increase the value we provide to our nutrition clients. We can't wait to hear more, but to get us started, tell us your story. How did you shift to the holistic field, and what inspired you to create this amazing analysis tool?
Thank you, Diana. I come from the corporate world in technology, and one of the last jobs that I had in the corporate world, I was traveling all the time, eating unhealthy. I was 50 pounds overweight, in pain all the time. I was even, taking that one drug Vioxx that killed a bunch of people. I didn't even realize, just for like a week or two, just because I was in pain. Anyway, so I picked up somebody gave me this book about the natural cures nobody ever told you about. And I just started learning all this stuff about food and how important food was. And I was eating so bad, Mountain Dew and Snickers, like really bad. And just through food on my own, learning so much, changing my diet, I lost weight. And then, everybody was like, what did you do? And I'm like, it's just food. And I'm like, I got to go leave my job and go learn about nutrition. And so I searched around through schools, and I found Bowman College. I signed up there. Ed Bowman, he's great. I learned so much from that schooling there. And but my favorite throughout my time there at Bowman, my favorite course or module was when they talked about blood work, and that just really led me down the path that we'll talk about here today.
That's really fascinating. I think we all have some kind of a personal journey. I always like to find out what the individual's story is. And, it's your passion and your knowledge and desire for more data to make things make sense. That's what is just so intriguing to me. Yeah. It's really been great watching your company grow over the last few years. I think I started with you as a customer a long time ago, back in the early days.
First customer.
And I'm a total data nerd myself. So that's probably part of the attraction, but I also think just our mutual passion for helping those we work with is the main connection.
Yeah, and so that's something that I knew that my colleagues, my nutrition therapists, consultant colleagues needed help in, interpreting blood test results. And I saw a need there, and I thought, I really liked doing this work. And I thought, I should turn what I'm doing, my spreadsheet, like everybody has their own spreadsheet. I'm like, I think I can turn this into software and help more practitioners be more efficient and effective in looking at blood work, because it is time consuming, and helping them help their clients, achieve better outcomes with looking at blood work. And we could talk more about that. So
Definitely. So we know the actual software and service you provide is primarily geared at practitioners, but the overall purpose is geared to looking to understand, helping people understand their health and their symptoms a little bit more at a deeper level, and seeing where their blood chemistry might be able to help them with that. So let's start out with the basics about why someone's basic blood work, something you might get like in a general wellness exam, is so important. So talk to us about what we can see in general blood work and how that's different maybe from a holistic point of view or a functional point of view versus what your doctor may be looking at it for.
yeah, well, even back in school when I knew nothing about blood work and I got first introduced to it, I was like, why didn't anybody teach me this? Or everybody should know this, because you go get your blood work done at the doctor and they just say everything looks normal. You don't know anything about the markers, anything about the ranges on those reports, and something never feels right when you're really going to the doctor, for some reason. You want them to, look at run blood tests and hopefully find some answers through that. And a lot of people aren't getting answers through that. And the reason is I'll start with the blood tests and the reports that you get back from the labs. You go to your doctor and they run the basics, the CBC and the CMP, probably the lipid panel, maybe a TSH. And then those, you get that report back, or they get that report. A lot of times you don't even see it. But on that report that you get back from LabCorp or Quest, they have those reference ranges on that report there. And those reference ranges are really based on 95% of that population tested either at that lab, in a region, around the country. Different labs have different ranges, but so it's 95% of the people tested, and most people that go get tested are really going to the doctor for some reason. So a lot of the blood work isn't going to look perfect. So you're comparing yourself to a population of some unhealthy, blood data. So the upper and lower ends of those ranges on the lab reports, they don't really represent optimal health. And that's where that comes into our space, our holistic functional space, where we like to look at the blood test results using reference ranges that we call functional or optimal reference ranges. So those are a tighter set of reference ranges that represent more optimal health. So they take that 95% population data and they do statistical analysis around it, and they take a normal distribution. And so that's how sometimes you hear, oh, everything's in the normal range. It's really, it's just a normal distribution, and that represents 2 standard deviations from the mean. But in optimal or functional ranges, they're tighter. They may represent 1 standard deviation from the mean, around 67% of the population. Or what I've done is scoured the research for different studies that I use, some around life insurance studies, where life insurance companies use different blood markers to decide if they're going to give somebody life insurance, or what level or how much they have to pay. And so there's a lot of good studies supporting different markers, a lot of good mortality studies. Glucose over a certain amount, you're more likely, to have this condition or whatever. And so there's a lot of good studies that support using a tighter set of reference ranges. And so that in our space, that's what we like to do for our clients, is look at the blood work and look for those markers that are out of optimal, so we can identify different imbalances in body systems to help be more proactive. And that's what we do. We help our clients be more proactive in their health. So if we can find those imbalances through the blood work using those optimal ranges that are specific and bio-individual also for that client. And that's another thing I do with the software in my research, is bio-individual ranges for that particular client based on their unique attributes. So So the analysis is pretty accurate in that way.
Yeah, because you even get into ranges appropriate for age, sex, ethnicity. I think you have like
Trimester, pregnancy, menstrual phase. Yeah. Elevation is
elevation.
another.
Yeah,
And
like
elevation is another cool one. If you live in a higher elevation city, like Denver or Bend, Oregon, so the barometric pressure up at that higher elevation is less. So that means every breath you take, you're breathing in less oxygen. So your body overcompensates by generating more red blood cells to try to pick up more oxygen. So you can't compare your results using reference ranges on LabCorp Quest. They don't adjust for elevation. And so those reference ranges are based at sea level. And there's several different markers around the red blood cells and around anemia where you want to adjust those reference ranges upward so you can properly assess somebody who's living at a higher elevation. So there's a lot of things that we can do to make the analysis more accurate.
I'm curious, Marianne. So you mentioned, kind of your standard typical blood panel that you might get at a well checkup. It seems like you're in favor of maybe more detailed blood work rather than the basics. And I'm curious to know maybe why physicians don't offer more detailed testing. And just as an example, I believe that at least at my physician's office right now, to get a vitamin D test, which I think is extremely important, it's extra. So that's not even considered in the basic lab panel anymore. That's an extra cost. But that, just as an example. So I guess, it seems like you do think it's important to get more detailed blood work.
Yeah.
And then maybe what are some limitations around why we're seeing it be so limited?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's, I guess, insurance regulations and things that they can order standard. Then, other tests need more diagnosis codes for justification to be ordered. And in a lot of times it's a lot of work. They don't have a lot of time with the patient. Also, they're not educated in this thing that we call in our holistic space, this functional blood chemistry analysis, where you can learn so much from blood work. And a lot of times they just don't know that you should order an iron panel with ferritin, and you can say that a microcytic hypochromic small red blood cell is always iron deficiency and give somebody an iron supplement. There's a lot more that you need to dig into before, just in that's just one example, before you can, recommend certain things. And so a lot of people have already the CBC, CMP. You could get good information from that, but to properly assess possible root causes of anemia, if they're present, one example is you definitely would need the iron panel. So you could go, you could help. Sometimes we recommend our clients, we give them a list of blood tests to say, go back to your doctor and with diagnosis codes and say, see if they'll use these codes to help you get other tests. If not, we as practitioners now have the ability to order blood tests for our clients. We can send them to any local LabCorp or Quest with any test that we recommend. And it's very inexpensive too, but it's all out of pocket. But sometimes you have to do that if you want the tests that you need, especially around thyroid as well. A lot of conventional doctors, they may order TSH and maybe T4 or maybe T4 free or T3 free and only just, adjust medication or prescribe medication based on those two levels. But if you don't order a full thyroid panel, you don't know what part of the thyroid physiology is really dysfunction, and especially thyroid antibodies. There's not many conventional doctors order thyroid antibodies. And if you could get them to order it, they really wouldn't know what to do with those results anyway. So there's a lot more that we can do and practitioners in our field can do to help clients understand their blood work even better.
And I think part of this is kind of differentiating and respecting different areas of expertise. I mean, we need our physicians and we want them to order our blood work, and their job is to use that blood work to make sure we're not in a disease state, right? And that's why they're using those reference ranges.
Right.
And we need that. I mean, our medical model is primarily disease-based, and that's what they're ordering blood work for, and they're using it to guide decisions about that, which is super important. But then there's this other should be member, I would say, of your care team, which is maybe somebody that is more holistic or functional, that can say, okay, well, maybe we're not looking at disease states and we're not looking at diagnosing conditions, but we can optimize how we feel in our health and work from more of a wellness or early action model or standpoint by looking at these same labs just with a different lens and looking at them in a different way. And so it's not to say that physicians aren't doing it right. They just have a job to do with them, and we have a little different job to do with them. And it'd be nice if there was a little bit more overlap, but until there is, I mean, at least you know that there's this other place you can go to look at it a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just understanding what their lane is, and they're in that lane. And if you have a value outside of outside of 200 or so in cholesterol, they want to prescribe a statin. If you have a glucose outside of 125, they want to give you some, that's what they're thinking, disease levels of blood markers associated with different medications. And they're good at that. And you're right. That's really a good point, Kristen. We have a whole different perspective on it, and we want to help people be more proactive so they don't get to that state.
Yeah, exactly.
So we talked about standard versus optimal lab ranges, which was fascinating the way that you explained that. And this just brings to mind, where this really it becomes very apparent is with high fasting glucose, which I think you just referred to, glucose marker. The standard lab range may be 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. So over 100 would be flagged as high, and your physician might at that point diagnose prediabetes. But if your level's 99, 1 point lower, it wouldn't be flagged, and you might be sent on your merry way when we know you're only 1 point away from a potential prediabetes diagnosis. And with our work in functional nutrition, there's myriad diet and lifestyle interventions that can effectively lower that number, which is super frustrating that a person with 99 might be sent away. So all that being said, let's get into some examples of blood markers that may have different optimal levels from reference ranges for the general population. And then why does that matter?
Yeah. Even the one that you just said there, glucose. So, I like to see it around like 85, 88 or so, 80, 83, somewhere in that range. And like you're saying, that we'd rather help people make diet and lifestyle improvements when they're outside of that optimal range before they get above 100. And so we love that if there could be that connection where, if they go to the doctor and their doctor sees that 99, recommend them go to somebody, that knows something about diet and lifestyle changes to improve that number. So yeah, glucose, along with that hemoglobin A1C is another one that we'd like to look at, and we like it, around 5.4. I think 6.4 is like the conventional medical number. And so around glucose, if there are some concerns around higher glucose and higher hemoglobin A1C, then you might want to look at insulin production. So then you would order a marker called C-peptide, which is a better marker of insulin production than insulin itself, because the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas, they produce this polypeptide. It's called proinsulin. And inside the blood, then that peptide splits off into C-peptide and insulin. And C-peptide just hangs around in the blood longer. And so we like to test that one versus insulin, just so we can get a number of, how much insulin the pancreas is producing. Is it burning out? And so that's another good one to order. And then, around, like I mentioned earlier, around, TSH, our optimal ranges for TSH, we'd like to see them around 1 to 2, that marker. And I think conventional ranges are more about up to 4.5. And so when we see numbers around 3-ish, 4, we'd like to ask, that client to go back to their doctor to see if they can order a full thyroid panel. Otherwise, I would always like to order T4 free in total, T3 free in total, thyroid antibodies, TSH, and T3 uptake, or thyroxine binding globulin, which is the protein that the liver produces that attaches to the thyroid hormone. So you really need that full panel to understand the signaling, the conversion, the production, all these different areas of thyroid physiology. So if anybody's on any thyroid medication and has never gotten a full thyroid panel with antibodies, I would definitely recommend doing that. And if your doctor doesn't do that, find somebody that on the NAMP, a practitioner on the site that may be able to help in ordering that. And vitamin D, you mentioned.
Before you go to vitamin D, because I want to circle back, because I think it's really interesting what you're talking about in terms of thyroid, but I want to make sure that our audience is clear as why is that important to us? And so your doctor may not look at it until your TSH is over 4, because that's a point at where medication for hypothyroidism might be something that they would recommend. But there's a lot of people out there that may have hypothyroid type symptoms, but never get to that level of 4, but somewhere below that, there's something going on either in making thyroid hormone or converting it to be able to be used that's causing them to feel these symptoms that diet and lifestyle can have a strong effect on before it ever gets to that medication standpoint. So I just want to put in perspective why we might want to have more of these numbers, because that helps us see where in the process something could be breaking down. And it's not that, it's not just a yes or no. You have hypothyroid symptoms, but it's not like you are or you're not hypothyroid. There's this spectrum, right? And so people can feel it without actually being diagnosed with something. And so that's where some of these things can be helpful.
Right.
And when you talk about the antibodies, I think one reason those don't get ordered very frequently by a physician is because those are looking for an autoimmune process. And there's not really a medication for an autoimmune thyroid other than helping the thyroid function with thyroid hormone. And so if they're not going to really do anything with those lab markers, there's no real reason for them to order them, because there's not a tool in their toolbox to work with that part. But from a holistic standpoint, there may be some things that we can do to support that and help with that process. So
yeah, I was just going to say, Kristen, the same thing about prediabetes we were just talking about. Physicians don't have a tool for prediabetes in medication, right? And so you could have, just be on the cusp there and have that diagnosis, and it's still you're sent on your merry way. So that's when a functional nutrition professional can be incredibly helpful in addressing that through diet and lifestyle, which we know can be done very successfully.
Right. What about what are some other ones, Marianne? I think you were getting into vitamin D, so I'll let you. Yeah, let's go on that trail a little bit.
Vitamin D is so important for immune system health, so many other physiological functions in the body. But we've seen in studies, even through COVID, that people with higher vitamin D levels had a higher success rate, and so we use vitamin D levels optimal around 50 to 80. And it's speaking of COVID, there's a marker that I've learned recently and I added to the software. It's called D-dimer. And so during the coagulation process, the liver makes fibrinogen. That's a protein, and that breaks down into fibrin, and that combines with platelets to form clots. And D-dimer is a breakdown product of fibrin. So there have been studies that show that higher levels of D-dimer are associated with microvascular coagulation. So coagulation in small vessels and higher levels of that were found in COVID patients and vaccinated patients to be associated with higher mortality rates. So anyway, that's a new one. If you're worried about clotting issues, we have platelets and mean platelet volume, and in the software too, there's platelets that are used to help form clots, and the size of the platelet matters for how many platelets you should have. So we adjust platelet ranges based on their size, and then there's fibrinogen and D-dimer, and those markers around coagulation may be good to look at for what I just mentioned around COVID. There's so many different markers, and I like to run also ceruloplasmin and serum copper, and copper is supposed to be in the blood attached to ceruloplasmin, and that attachment helps iron convert from the ferrous form to the ferric form, which is the proper form, so it can be attached to transferrin, so then it can be transported to bone marrow to help get incorporated into hemoglobin for red blood cells. And so also copper, if copper is not bound to ceruloplasmin in the blood, and free floating copper is just floating around, I have a formula in the software to identify that. That's also a concern. Free copper, just like free iron, is a concern because it could be peroxidation, lipid peroxidation, and damaging of cells. And so looking at markers like that, magnesium, red blood cell magnesium, I always like to order. That's a good marker for, inside the red blood cell version, not the magnesium serum that sometimes gets ordered, but magnesium red blood cell is the magnesium they tested inside the red blood cell, which is supposed to be a representative sample of magnesium inside of other tissues. So anytime you could test a nutrient inside of a red blood cell, that's a good form to do it if it's mainly supposed to be inside a red blood cell.
So just to circle, I'm going to circle back again. So, because you made some really good points, I just want to make sure we bring them out and our audience hears these things. So like with the vitamin D, you mentioned that we like to see from a more optimal range between 50 and 80, but most labs aren't going to flag a low vitamin D unless it's below 30. And I've seen some labs not even flag until it was below 20. So that's a very significant difference with how many things vitamin D support. You mentioned immune function, but we've got bone health, getting, the relationship with calcium and getting what we need in our bones and all of that. So there's just so many functions. So that's a really big one. And then, what you said about copper, copper being so important, relative to the red blood cells and what you've talked about, but also with, what I've noticed is, ever since the pandemic, people have been supplementing quite a bit with zinc. And when you supplement high levels of zinc for a long time, it's very easy to throw copper out of balance. They have this very synergistic relationship. And so I'm finding more and more clients that are willing to look at some of these things, that they've got way high amounts of zinc in their red blood cells, but the copper is not matching that. And so we've got an imbalance. And
so there's a high zinc copper ratio. You're seeing that. Oh, wow. Right. That's a good point. Right.
Yeah. So any others that stand out to you that have like a different functional range that, that really matters for the general population than what a typical conventional range might look like?
Let me see.
I was kind of thinking triglycerides maybe, because
because 150 is the lab range, but we like to see it like around 50 to 100, and triglyceride to HDL ratio too. That's a really good ratio that it's not really on a lab report. They calculate some other ratios around lipids, but that might be the best one. Triglycerides to HDL, you want that about like 2 to 1.
And triglycerides are so malleable through diet and lifestyle. It's quite amazing. So that's a really
really probably the most important marker on the lipid panel. The cholesterol markers, high cholesterol is there for, helping with inflammation, right? It's not but triglycerides is something that you can really impact with diet, like you said. And that's a real clear indication of, I first always think of high carb diet, high refined foods diet when I
Or
see
too many calories. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a little bit too much alcohol.
Yeah, that
Sometimes
could
it
be,
can
sir,
trigger
absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
It's also fascinating. And what I love is how empowering this can be for people when they understand how it applies to them and their health. And once they start to see that, it's like the light bulb comes on. It's like, wow, I can eat different. I can do these things and I can affect my health and my longevity, those types of things. So it's just so empowering.
And they could see it on their blood report too, right? I mean, having that information on nice color-coded bar graphs where you can see where your values really fall. Am I really in the optimal range? And then being able to compare that over time is really powerful, and showing it to show how changes in lifestyle can impact blood markers. And you could even from some other, like liver markers, there's 2 different examples where the liver markers, ALT and AST, they're B6 dependent enzymes. And when they're low, you can infer that there may be a B6 deficiency. Or alkaline phosphatase, that's a zinc dependent enzyme. And so even if you didn't order zinc, if that's low, that might be an indication of a zinc deficiency, or it may be even a magnesium deficiency. So there's so many other things that you can find out from looking at the typical blood markers that your conventional doctor may be overlooking because they don't know, or they don't have time. And so there's other ways out there, people like Kristen and Diana that, and practitioners that look at blood work from a functional perspective that can give you a lot of answers that can help, get you those answers that you haven't really, had before.
So, something that's fascinating to me is I've been kind of following you recently about the deep dive you've taken into pregnancy and differences in lab ranges for pregnancy trimesters. So I know we could do a whole hour on this topic alone, and we don't have another hour, but I bet you could at least give us a brief snapshot of some of the special considerations that we might take into consideration.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many physiological changes that happen during pregnancy, and that's not reflected on the blood work and the ranges that you get back from LabCorp requests. And just one example of that is a lot of times where a pregnant woman will get her blood work back from LabCorp requests, and all the markers are high or low. And then the pregnant woman is very anxious of, what's wrong with all my blood work? Well, they're not looking at that blood work using the proper ranges. So if you adjust the reference ranges based on trimester of pregnancy in my software, I have over 100 markers adjusted for each pregnancy trimester, and reference ranges for each pregnancy trimester. And when you put the values in for a pregnant woman, you pick the trimester, and all those outer range values that were on the LabCorp report now look optimal because we're adjusting and using the appropriate reference ranges for those markers. And it's just a big relief for that patient, knowing that, things are really normal. I mean, one example is neutrophils. Neutrophils increase dramatically throughout pregnancy because they're needed to help for this spiral artery remodeling, the arteries that connect the placenta to the mother and the fetus. And they're, who knew all these different things. And so if you would look at a pregnant woman in the 3rd trimester, neutrophils, it would look high if you're just using the range on the lab report. But if you adjust those for the appropriate levels, that marker may look normal. And so you wouldn't be maybe chasing a bacterial infection in the 3rd trimester when you know that that's a normal value. And so there's so many different changes that happen and adjustments that you have to make around pregnancy that, if you're not making those adjustments, you can interpret a lot of things incorrectly. And it's so fascinating. And so I've done so much research around this that I'm partnered with a colleague, Sarah Russell. She's a clinician who focuses around a pregnancy and postpartum and even preconception. And so we're going to teach a course for practitioners on how to interpret blood work during those 3 phases, and explain the different physiological changes of how, hemodilution and how the blood vessels vasodilate, take on more water during pregnancy, and a lot of markers look low just because of that. And so many different areas that, it's just helping practitioners help support pregnant women, and it makes me happy to do that.
Are there any markers in particular that you can think of during pregnancy or preconception that you think are particularly important to keep an eye on, maybe, that might not be?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you don't want to go into pregnancy with, your thyroid out of whack, especially with thyroid antibodies. You want to really take care of that, before getting pregnant. You want to make sure there's no iron deficiency. There's anemia happens during pregnancy, and a lot of times half the time it's not iron deficiency either, but you don't want to go into pregnancy in an anemic or iron deficient state. So definitely a good iron panel, and a lot of other markers. Like we were teaching the course, the preconception tests to run, like vitamin A, vitamin B6, folate. You want to know going in, what those levels are, so you can pick the proper prenatal with the right amounts in them. A lot of times people are just picking prenatals and they have a lot of B6 or folate, and they're getting, nauseous, and when they're taking too much or not taking enough. So there's, all sorts of different things. I could talk about pregnancy for hours, but we're teaching. Our course starts next week. It's a 6-week live course, all about different markers throughout pregnancy, preconception, and postpartum.
And Marianne, is that course something that would be recorded? If this episode comes out after the live version?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we're going to record it and keep it up there. Yeah, we're going to do like 2 hours each of, and provide all the slides, and then have a recording up on the site. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, this conversation has been really interesting and super helpful for understanding our unique needs as individuals. But we'd love to know a little bit more about your company, LabSmarts, specifically what it is, who can use it, and then how individuals can find someone to help them navigate optimal blood work ranges.
Yeah, I mean, so the software is for practitioners. I mean, I do have a couple really gung-ho clients that have just signed up on their own because they get their blood tested often and they understand how to interpret it. But it's for functional practitioners, anybody really who wants to look at blood work from an optimal perspective, and you have reports that are color-coded with different reference ranges, all backed by a huge bibliography of research that I've spent thousands of hours on. So where these reference ranges come from, with different adjustments, like we said, for these different individual traits of that client. And then we can also, in the software, compare values over time, so you can see, based on the recommendations that your practitioner has provided, how your blood markers are improving. And that's really impactful for a lot of people to be able to see those results. So the software is, so to find, I really should have a practitioner directory up on my website with all the practitioners using the software. But I mean, I know Kristen uses it, and there's a lot of practitioners at NANP on their website. They use the software. And if you could contact me on the website if you're looking for somebody in your area, and I can see if they're a user.
That's fantastic. I know that we're going to have practitioners interested in learning more about it, and hopefully we have more individuals out there curious about their own lab work, wanting to dig into it more and just understand more about themselves. Like, the more we understand about our unique needs, the more we can support ourselves, right? And hopefully find someone to help guide them as well. But
with practitioners, a lot of people come to us with blood work. I mean, they have some sort of blood work that, if you're just able to take that information, put it in the software, give them this nice report where they can visually, see where they're in and out of range, it's really impactful, and it really shows them that you're adding value above and beyond what they're getting, from their doctor. And so it's a pretty powerful tool for using in your practice, and adding as a new service. I've had a lot of practitioners are adding blood work analysis and interpretation as part of their services.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic when you can combine it with the diet and lifestyle things to help make a difference.
Right.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say, for those of you listening that aren't nutrition professionals, one thing that makes nutrition professionals so valuable is that we can act as a partner to help you advocate for yourself. Because as Marianne alluded to, physicians are so busy. Most appointments with a physician are very, very short. 6 to 8 minutes or something is the average time frame. So it's really hard to get everything that you need from that appointment. And we all need a partner in our health. So that's really where we see our value in this space is to partner with you, help you advocate. Just as Marianne was saying, here are some things to go back and ask your physician for a retest or additional tests. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable doing that on their own. But if they say, oh, well, my nutrition professional suggested this, or, you just have somebody on your team that can help support you, that can just be really, really beneficial. I've seen that be helpful hundreds and hundreds of times. So I just wanted to put that out there for all of you that may not be professionals that are listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marianne, I'm so glad we could do this today. We'll have links to your software, your website, and all your social media in the show notes today. But thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, ladies, both. I really appreciated the opportunity. It's so nice talking with you.
You're a gem, a real gem. Yeah. It's hard to believe that we're up on time, but thank you so much again. I'll just reiterate what Kristen said, and thanks to all the listeners out there. We really appreciate you all sharing your time by joining us, and we can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you'd like to access other episodes or subscribe so you don't miss a beat, you can find us at nanp.org/NANP-podcast.
Membership in the NANP provides you with a competitive advantage. Whether you're a current practitioner or a student, we want you to become an active, informed leader of the holistic nutrition community and join today at nanp.org. NANP is very proud to provide the highest level of professional recognition and validation in the holistic nutrition industry through the board certification in holistic nutrition credential. To earn this valuable designation, candidates must demonstrate an exceptional level of knowledge and understanding of holistic nutrition by passing a board exam and documenting client contact hours. Are you ready to boost your credibility with board certification? Visit nanp.org today to apply.
Keep in mind that the information on the NANP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NANP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NANP and all agents. Copyright NANP, all rights reserved.